Sherrone Moore talked for 30 minutes on Thursday, and he was as good as he's been with the media, since he's taken over as Michigan's head coach, maybe since he's come to Michigan 7 years ago. But he spoke to campers before he spoke to the media. He gave his speech like the head coaches do at this camp. And I just love this quote that it has kind of gone viral since. But this is from his speech to high school players. He said, "Everybody's going to have haters. Your haters are holding your breath for you to fail. Your job is to make their asses suffocate. That's what your job is to do."
Bars.
He had some pretty good quips, just even throughout talking to us and that sort of thing. But he was, as expected, a guy who's that fiery, gave a great speech, and then, gave a lot of insight on his team as well when we got to talk to him.
Thursday was interesting because in a lot of ways, it was the most that we've ever been able to see Sherrone Moore in his element in terms of how he speaks to large groups of people that aren't us, how he speaks to high school players, how he speaks to football players. And again, a lot of those guys you can see in the video on screen, they just kind of sit there behind him with their arms folded. And, maybe, Tony Anise is whispering something as we watch it live. But there's like a gravitas about him when you put him up against some of these other coaches and the way that he talks to the players. And, again, a lot of it is just kind of generic stuff that you would tell any high school kid that's looking for advice or any prospective player that wants to play at the college level. But, for me, I thought it was really interesting to see him in that sort of element because we haven't really seen that. We've seen snippets of stuff. We've been on the field before road games and seen how he's talked to his players. But, to see that sort of showcase for him, I thought he fared pretty well there. Not that there's anything to win or lose by that, but, as a representative of the University of Michigan, as the team's head coach, he belongs. And it seems like he fits the role and he's pretty good at what he does. In terms of what he had to say to us, I'm with you. I think that's, the thing with Sherrone is that, he's never going to give away the nuclear launch codes, maybe even less so than his predecessor in terms of at least Jim could punch something up with an anecdote or him just being Jim Harbaugh. But with Sherrone Moore, it feels like every time we've talked to him this offseason, it's been some kind of overwhelming circumstance where you get the job, introductory press conference. He did pretty good there, but when we talked to him in spring, it seemed like every time Sherrone Moore was made available, you're getting asked questions about Greg Scruggs. You're getting asked questions about the transfer portal and recruiting. And it just seemed like Thursday at this event, a guy who was, it seems like he's hit this is all a long-winded way of me saying, it feels like he's comfortable. It feels like he's hitting his stride in the job. And, again, I don't get the sense that anything that's going on is too big for him. So to me, I think, a lot to glean from what he had to say. I know we'll talk about it here, but, again, it's a lot different. We go to this camp last year and we're talking to Jim Harbaugh, and for Michigan State, Mel Tucker is there. And there's a couple more, a lot more power conference head coaches there at last year's event, it seemed like. But, this is kind of the one showcase that both Michigan and Michigan State get to have where you bring your whole staffs out. You're kind of the mayor of the event. You're the talk of the town. And, Sherrone Moore, not shy to talk about them just having won a national title too. So there is a lot to glean from that.
Yeah, and Sherrone Moore, when he was talking to the campers, he did introduce himself as Sherrone Moore. I'm the head coach of the University of Michigan football team and a proud member of the 2023 national championship team. Kind of a sly way of sliding that in there. And, Jonathan Smith was sitting there behind him and had to listen to that. And same with Walty, my guy, Ryan Walters, who I believe was in that session behind him as well. Yes, he was. So, I was thinking of going up to Ryan Walters and doing a blow-by handshake, but, I wouldn't do something like that. But, Anthony, I'm going to read off a few of, I think, what stood out to me, at least when I'm thinking about it a day later, from what Sherrone Moore said to the media, and then we could talk about, kind of what we took from it. But Amorian Walker is back, as I know we've talked about on the show, but he spent the semester at Ole Miss. probably was going to come back anyway. Hey, I got to get my national championship rings. Might as well just transfer back to the University of Michigan and play wide receiver. We got to talk to him later in the day. He said it's like going back to wide receiver from corner is like putting on an old pair of shoes that you haven't worn in a while. So maybe a little bit of rust, but it seemed like it was he was trying to make the analogy of riding a bike, and he said that he's really just jumped right back into it. Sherrone Moore loves the tough schedule that Michigan has this year. He said, want it, need it. Jack Tuttle, Giovanni El-Hadi, Josh Preeb, all healthy. He said that Tuttle has been full go back in the huddle. And Giovanni El-Hadi, not sure what his injury was, but he's healthy after missing the spring game. And then Josh Preeb at left guard, Northwestern transfer, cut his lip open. I know we've talked about it on the show. Pretty gnarly. Sherrone, loved the play that it happened on. It was, a play with Mason Graham. I think I don't know what happened, but their helmets got tangled or something like that. He said that Josh Preeb wanted to stay in. He was bleeding everywhere. They made him come out after a couple minutes, but so, seems like he'll be fine. Obviously nothing major there with a lip injury. He had to get stitches. Grant Newsome, offensive line coach, is a rising star. He says, has confidence that he'll continue, building what the offensive line has established itself as over the last few years. I asked him about NIL events. He's been out. He was in Chicago the night before. He was in Grand Rapids last week. He was in Chicago, I think, again last week. And he said there's been a lot of momentum there as they're trying to raise money, revenue sharing. We'll talk about that later, but feels like the fundraising is still going to be a necessary piece for them. Talked about the transfer additions. Michigan adding 4 defensive backs in the last couple of weeks, adding some depth competition to the room. And he said, guys have to embrace that competition is coming, and the guys that they like the most on the team do embrace that. And he said, you got to get used to it now, because if you're going to go to the next level, the competition is going to be even better. Those are a few of the nuggets, but I guess, from your standpoint, what stood out the most, and, kind of just take it wherever you want.
For me, the questions about the schedule are always going to kind of stick out. And they're going to say, just like Jim Harbaugh would say, we'll play anyone. We'll play on the moon. We'll play in a parking lot. We'll play at the big house. It doesn't matter. But for me, when you look at this schedule, and I know we'll break it down in more depth as the summer goes on, but I think as a first-time head coach, you're excited by that, because there is no, whatever they do this year, if they are very successful, there's no fool's gold in that. Like your aptitude, your mettle as a program, your culture, your talent, it will all be tested right off the bat. There is no, well, I think it might look like this, it could be that. No, I mean, whatever Michigan does this year, the proof is going to be in the pudding. And, for a guy like that, a competitor like Sherrone Moore, a guy who has, helped win a lot of big games at Michigan, to have maybe the most big games on the schedule before you even get to a postseason, I think is exciting for them. And you get there's no, I think sometimes, and this isn't me throwing any of our peers under the bus or anything like that, but I think sometimes when we're in these scrums, and whether it be with coaches or with players, people ask about the schedule and they're hoping for someone to say, it's daunting. I don't know. That's kind of spooky. I get it's really the opposite. These guys are excited to play more of these big games. I'd have to think, as fun as it was to win all of those games last year, I think if you took a poll of most guys on the team, they'd probably be like, hey, listen, I would have loved to play more 4-quarter games. I don't want to be standing on the sidelines with my helmet off, holding my shoulder pads like this in the 3rd quarter. So I think that's something that adds a lot of juice and a lot of urgency to setting a tone for what this next stage of the program is going to look like. It was interesting to me as well that, when you sift, I think a lot of revealing answers, maybe not so revealing, but a little more open in his approach to chatting with us, talking about us. I mean, answered everything there wasn't really a canned answer in there. I'd have to go back and sift through it. But, for me, I think it just, there's some juice. There's some excitement there. It's not, a lot of people are going to talk about this team all summer as being a group that lost all these players and lost Jim Harbaugh. And now the bill comes due. You're going to play a tough schedule. You don't have a starting quarterback. I just get the sense that all of that is kind of serving as fuel for them. And there is a little pep in everyone's step because they know come week 1, you've got a much tougher game than you've had in the past. Certainly come week 2. And I just think that that's kind of serving as, not just for Sherrone Moore, but fuel for all these guys, including the players that we talked to yesterday.
No doubt. And coaches are usually in a good mood at this time of year. They just came off May. Sherrone Moore said that he had a little bit of time over Memorial Day weekend to relax. I think he said he was hanging by his pool, had some, good food to eat. It's kind of one of their 2, times off a little bit. You get a little bit of time in July, a little bit of time in May, but now it's official visit season. I think they're in a good mood because of that. There hasn't been practice every day, so it's not kind of, you're not trying to guard all this information, that sort of thing. And Jim Harbaugh was always in a good mood when he talked at this camp as well. And I agree. And all the players, they like the schedule too. It's kind of interesting. I forget who said it, but somebody from the media yesterday said and asked Sherrone Moore about this, where last year they had all this experience, but they had kind of a slow build throughout the season. No marquee games really until Penn State, which was on November 11th. This year you have a lot less experience, but you have games right away that you're going to have to prove yourself in. And you'll take a different approach to it. I mean, last year I think Will Johnson probably could have played more in the non-conference schedule, but he was kind of ramping himself up coming off of an injury. They didn't get, you give too many touches to different guys in the non-conference. Like you said, they took them out early, not many fourth quarters where key players were in. So you're going to take a different approach. So it's not this one-to-one comparison, but it is going to be interesting with the new guys that have to step up on this team, that they have to do it right away. But again, they're preparing for that. And two, I mean, in 2018, when they opened up with Notre Dame on the road, they lost that game ultimately, but I think it probably helped that team stay focused throughout the year or throughout the offseason and have something to look forward to and have that sense of urgency during fall camp. All they talked about, Notre Dame. This year you have Fresno State, which could be a little bit of a tricky game, but you're a 3-touchdown favorite. I think 22.5 points on DraftKings. Then you play Texas. So I think a lot of the talk probably internally is about that Texas game. I know Texas's coaches said that they have already been scouting Michigan. Samaj Morgan yesterday would not comment on whether or not Michigan has started the process of looking at
one of the few things he won't comment on, by the way.
Right. It's true. I love talking to Samaj, and he's fantastic to talk to. But yeah, it was almost a little surprising that he held back on that one. But he said, man, I can't talk about that, which is basically a yes, of course. And you look at every opponent at this time of the year, at least somebody in the building is. But it's going to be exciting. And so I guess anything else before we move on to Morion Walker?
No, Megan, if you don't mind bringing the schedule back up really quick, I had one more point on that. I think that I just workshopped in my brain as we're talking about this. So the way that this breaks down is interesting to me. And again, I'm probably jumping the gun here. This is probably, we could probably do an entire show on this later on in the summer. But when you look at this schedule, it's interesting to me that really every 2 games or so is kind of a benchmark game in terms of where you hope to be by this, where you hope to be by that. I mean, 2 games in, you got Texas. 4 games in, you have USC. 6 games in, you go on the road for the first time and play at Washington, a team that you played for the national title last year. And then, 2 games after that, it's a rivalry game in Michigan State, and you've got them and Oregon in back-to-back weeks. And obviously the ramp up from there is the lead up to Ohio State. So, it's when we talk about the schedule, what this team might look like, I really think that we could start maybe thinking about, and coming back to this later on in the summer, like what benchmarks look like by week 2, what you'd like to see by week 4, etc. Just an interesting fleeting thought that I had as we close.
No, I agree. I agree. It's going to be interesting, and it just is going to be action packed from a Michigan fan perspective. When you look at the home schedule and how exciting that's going to be for people with season tickets. I know there are a lot of people on the wait list trying to get season tickets right now. This is one of the home schedules, and you have some marquee road games as well at Ohio State, at Washington, but specifically at home, one of the ones that that they don't come around all that often. You will host Oklahoma here in a couple years. You go down to Norman next year. You go at Texas the year after. So there are going to be some big games, not just with the expanded Big Ten, but the way Michigan has, positioned its schedule here going forward.